In a five-star Manhattan restaurant where crystal chandeliers glimmered and whispers floated like perfume, an elderly black man in a crisp police uniform stepped through the front doors, heads turned, forks paused mid-air. That afternoon, the president himself was dining in the private suite upstairs, and no one expected this man to walk in. The staff hesitated. Was this a prank? A mistake? It wasn't. That man, stooped, quiet, and unfamiliar to the rich patrons, was Colonel Reuben Miles, a retired military hero decorated with over 3 decades of service, including 3 tours abroad and 2 national medals. Unknown to the diners, President Daniel Rhodes had personally invited him here. But titles and history meant nothing to protocol. As Reuben stood respectfully by the entrance, 2 young white security officers approached. "Routine," they muttered. They patted him down, gloves brushing over each pocket, yet their contempt wasn't hidden. One sneered, "Feels like digging through a dumpster." Reuben said nothing, until one of them froze. From Reuben's back pocket, the officer pulled out a small, brightly colored object. Pink fabric, frilled edges, a child's underwear, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The air turned icy. Reuben's face contorted in horror. "That's not mine," he whispered. "I've never seen that before." But it didn't matter. He had no children, no family nearby, no explanation, just a piece of fabric that screamed guilt to the press already circling outside. He was handcuffed. And just like that, a national icon was reduced to a monster in headlines. The arrest sent shockwaves through Washington. Talk shows exploded. Protesters filled the streets. President Rhodes, young, brilliant, and notably the nation's first black president, was facing re-election in just 3 months, and now his personal guest had been accused of one of the most vile crimes imaginable. Was this the unraveling of an administration? The story should have ended in shame, but what no one knew, not the media, not the public, not even Reuben himself, was that this was never about a crime. It was a setup. A perfectly engineered scandal, planted by someone close to the president, someone who believed power should never be held by a black man. And before the truth could surface, one woman, unexpected, relentless, and with everything to lose, would shatter the lies and burn down the man who lit the match. But for now, the lie was winning. Colonel Reuben Miles, once saluted by foreign generals and American presidents alike, now sat slumped on a cold metal bench inside a holding cell. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. His hands were trembling, not with fear, but with rage. "This isn't happening," he kept thinking. "This can't be happening." 2 hours ago, he was supposed to shake hands with the president. Now, his name was trending on every major news outlet, smeared in bold letters, war hero turned predator. No trial, no defense, just the image of a black man in cuffs and a pink pair of underwear no one could explain. Across the city, in the west wing of the Capitol, President Daniel Rhodes was watching it unfold in real time. He stood silently, fists clenched behind his back as aides scrambled around him. "Sir, the press is demanding a statement. Do you want us to distance your office from the colonel?" Daniel said nothing. To the public, this was political suicide, a friend and guest tied to scandal. But to Daniel, Reuben wasn't just a retired officer. He was the man who had pulled Daniel's father from a burning convoy in Kandahar 25 years ago. Without Reuben Miles, Daniel wouldn't even be alive. And deep down, something didn't sit right. The timing, the way the press got the story before the White House, the way security found the evidence, it all felt too perfect, too convenient. Back at the precinct, Reuben sat up as the steel door clanked open. 2 officers entered, both white, both smirking. "Look what we got here, another noble uniform hiding filthy secrets," one said. The other added, "Bet you thought your medals would protect you." Reuben didn't answer. His silence only fueled their disgust. One officer grabbed him by the collar. "You think you're better than us? You think the president's going to save you?" The punch came fast, a fist to the ribs, then another to the gut. Reuben collapsed, coughing blood onto the floor. "You're just another old black man who forgot his place," the second officer hissed. Suddenly a third voice echoed from the hallway, a young woman's, urgent and shaky. "Don't touch him." The officers froze. A rookie detective stood at the threshold, eyes wide. Her badge wobbled as she held it out. "My name's Detective Chloe Vance, and I just reviewed the surveillance footage from the restaurant. The officers turned. "What footage?" one said. Voice sharp. She stepped forward. The restaurant's bathroom hallway. Where Ruben was waiting before the security sweep, I saw a man in a dark suit bump into him. Hard. And just before that, the same man walked into the restroom carrying something pink in his pocket. She held up a flash drive. I pulled the footage myself. He planted it. Ruben looked up, dazed. "Who was it?" he whispered. Chloe swallowed. "We're still IDing him, but the image is clear. And I'll tell you one thing, he walked out of that building straight into a black SUV with tinted windows, registered to the Department of Defense." The room fell silent. Someone had gone to incredible lengths to destroy Ruben. Someone with access, motive, and power. And this wasn't just an attack on a man. It was a move in a larger game, one aimed straight at the heart of the presidency. President Daniel Rhodes stared at the still image on his monitor, grainy surveillance footage from the restaurant hallway. The man in the dark suit wasn't just anyone. It was Bradley Kerr, a high-ranking aide from the Department of Defense, and more alarmingly, a longtime loyalist of Defense Secretary Marcus Langley. Daniel's stomach twisted. Langley. Of course. Langley had opposed his nomination from the beginning, calling it symbolic nonsense to have a black man lead the nation. Daniel had kept him on in an attempt at bipartisanship, a mistake he now realized, one that might cost him everything. He pressed the intercom. "Hear me, Langley. Now, face to face." Minutes later, Langley arrived in the Oval Office, calm as ever, his graying hair neatly parted, a smug confidence riding on every step. He didn't sit when Daniel gestured toward the chair. He stood tall, chin slightly raised. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Langley asked. Daniel turned the screen toward him. Langley didn't flinch. "That's your aide," Daniel said. "Caught red-handed, planting evidence on a retired colonel you knew I was meeting." Langley raised a brow. "Is that what it looks like to you?" Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Don't play games with me." Langley gave a dry chuckle. "I'm not. I'm playing chess. And you, Mr. President, are down to your final move." Daniel stood. "Do you really think you can undermine the White House without consequences?" Langley leaned in slightly. "I don't need to. You're doing a fine job destroying yourself. The country's already on fire over this scandal, and let's be honest, how many more voters are going to riot, cry, or bleed for a black president?" Daniel's voice was cold steel. "You framed an innocent man for politics." Langley smiled thinly. "Not just for politics. For preservation. This nation needs stability, not symbolism." He turned to leave. "Oh," he added over his shoulder, "you should resign. Do it with dignity before we release footage of Ruben getting cozy with a child at the airport." Daniel's blood ran cold. "Fabricated," he growled. "It doesn't matter," Langley said, without turning back. "By the time they figure that out, it'll be too late." As the door closed behind him, Daniel clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. The next morning, media outlets erupted with a new leak, grainy footage of a man resembling Ruben helping a lost little girl in an airport. The footage was twisted, captioned with phrases like grooming behavior and disturbing conduct. No context. No proof. Just fuel. And the fire spread. Nationwide protests turned into clashes. Schools closed. National Guard deployment was on the table. Approval ratings crashed. Daniel watched, helpless, as the narrative slipped further from his control. In a secure government facility, Ruben watched the chaos unfold from a small TV in the corner of his cell. His eyes were hollow, his lips cracked. He had stopped eating. Every headline chipped away at his will to fight, until a face appeared on the screen that made him sit upright. Lydia Monroe, an investigative journalist with a reputation for taking down corrupt politicians, and an old contact of his from years ago when she covered the wars abroad. She stood at a press podium now, holding a manila folder. "This morning," she began, "I receive anonymous documents implicating a coordinated campaign inside the Department of Defense to fabricate evidence against Colonel Ruben Miles. These files include audio recordings, internal memos, and orders signed by high-ranking officials. One name keeps recurring: Secretary Marcus Langley." Gasps filled the press room. Langley, watching from a private bunker, spat his coffee across the table. "Who leaked it?" he shouted. Lydia continued, "And perhaps more disturbingly, one document contains this phrase, circled in red ink: Operation Restoration. Return the White House to its rightful hands. Rightful hands. The meaning was clear, and it wasn't about qualifications, it was about color. Reuben broke into tears. Daniel, watching from his office, felt something shift, not in the media, not in the polls, but in the soul of the country. The line had been crossed too far. The truth had finally pierced the fog. He picked up the phone. Bring Reuben here, publicly, no more silence. Outside the White House, a sea of people gathered, some cheering, others shouting. Police lines swelled. A new rumor whispered through the crowd. The president was going to speak. With the man they said was a monster. No one was prepared for what came next. The stage was set, and Daniel Rhodes was done playing defense. The press conference was called for noon, but by 10 a.m., the crowd outside the White House had swelled into thousands. Protesters, supporters, cameras, news anchors broadcasting live across the nation. Everyone waited, breath held, to see if the president would finally break his silence, and whether the man accused of unthinkable crimes would dare show his face beside him. At exactly 12:03, the South Lawn podium microphone crackled. Daniel emerged first. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie crooked. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. Behind him, 2 Secret Service agents guided a frail but upright Colonel Reuben Miles to the stage. His face was bruised, one eye still swollen. Yet when he stepped forward to the podium, a hush fell over the crowd. Daniel spoke first. I come before you not as your president, he began, voice hoarse but steady, but as a man trying to do what's right. He paused. Today I withdraw my candidacy for re-election. Gasps rippled through the audience, reporters shouted questions, his aides looked stunned. Even Reuben turned toward him, confused. Daniel raised a hand to silence the chaos. I made this choice not because I am guilty of anything, but because I will not be the reason this nation tears itself apart. I refuse to let power matter more than truth or more than justice for this man standing beside me. Suddenly, someone in the crowd screamed, traitor, another shouted, hero, and then chaos. And a woman burst past the barricade, pushing through stunned Secret Service agents. She was petite, sharp-eyed, and breathless. Her hands clutched a thick, worn leather folder. She ran straight toward the stage and shouted one word. Stop. All cameras turned, security closing, but Daniel raised his hand again. The woman leapt onto the stage. For a moment, no one recognized her. And then Reuben gasped, Isabella. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. You saved me once, Colonel. 15 years ago in a fire at a military base in Nevada. I was just a child, trapped in a supply closet. You carried me out. She turned to Daniel, voice shaking. This man saved my life, and now I'm going to return the favor. She slammed the fold down on the podium and flipped it open. Inside, official letters, timestamps, photos, and one key piece of evidence, a secret memo signed by Langley himself, instructing his aide, Bradley Kerr, to implant destabilizing material on target Reuben Miles to trigger political fallout ahead of primary withdrawal demand. The room spun, and then Isabella dropped the final bomb. The memo was retrieved from my husband's laptop. He works in Langley's office. He tried to delete it. I backed it up. Before anyone could react, someone in the audience screamed, "Sniper!" Secret Service agents swarmed. But it wasn't aimed at the president. A single silenced shot shattered the air. One of Langley's men, embedded in the crowd, had tried to silence Isabella. Yet he missed. Seconds later, agents tackled him to the ground. The rifle fell from his hands. The truth, once more, had nearly been erased. But this time it survived. As Reuben looked at Isabella, now weeping, her hands shaking, he stepped forward and pulled her into a silent embrace. And above them all, President Daniel Rhodes took the microphone once more. No more lies, no more fear. We fight back now, together. Those words echoed not just across the South Lawn, but across the entire country. In homes, offices, and city squares, Americans of all backgrounds watched the live feed in stunned silence. Some wept, some cheered, but everyone felt it. Something had shifted. The lie had been exposed, but the war wasn't over. Behind the scenes, the DOJ launched an immediate investigation into Secretary Langley. Arrest warrants were issued. Federal agents stormed his Virginia estate at 3:17 a.m. only to find it abandoned. his security detail missing, documents torched in the fireplace, surveillance hard drives ripped from the walls. Langley had vanished. President Rhodes was informed just before dawn. He didn't flinch. Then we find him, he said, alive. Hours later, something unexpected happened. The White House received a secure call from a blocked international number. The voice on the other end was unmistakable, calm, controlled. Langley, you think this ends with me, he said. I was just the spine of a larger beast. He laughed softly. Do you really believe exposing one conspiracy heals 400 years of resentment? Then came the real blow. Check the Eastgate security logs, he whispered, before your next press conference. Daniel rushed to the East Wing. Security scrambled to pull surveillance records. When the footage loaded, it showed a black SUV pulling through the restricted gate, escorted by a White House staffer, not just any staff, Chief of Staff Eleanor Reeds, the woman who had stood beside Daniel since his campaign, his trusted advisor, godmother to his daughter. She was the mole. Daniel stared at the screen in disbelief as Eleanor calmly opened the gate for Langley's escape vehicle, then returned to her office, never once looking back. I trusted her, Daniel muttered, heart pounding. The betrayal hit deeper than politics. It was personal. Moments later, Eleanor was apprehended leaving the Capitol. In her purse, a burner phone, a flash drive labeled Next Wave, and a handwritten note that read, "He's not the last, and this country's not ready." Inside the Oval Office, Daniel sat across from Reuben and Isabella. None of them spoke for a moment. Finally, Reuben broke the silence. You still stepping down? Daniel shook his head. Not anymore. He stalked, turning to the cameras now gathering just outside the window. This isn't about me anymore, he said. It's about what we do next. That night, Daniel addressed the nation one last time, but not with resignation, with resolve. He spoke of betrayal and redemption, of lies that nearly tore the country apart, and of ordinary people, like Reuben, like Isabella, who refused to stay silent even when the world demanded it. Justice, he said, does not begin with courts. It begins with courage. It begins with us. Across the country, something unexpected happened. The protests stopped. People gathered not in rage, but in silence, in reflection. Black, white, Democrat, Republican. They lit candles, sang together, stood as one. Reuben Miles was no longer a criminal. He was a symbol. And Daniel Rhodes wasn't just a president. He was a man who had chosen the truth over power. And that made all the difference. 1 year later, a new monument stood quietly near the National Mall. Not large, not grand, but impossible to ignore. It bore a single inscription. Truth may be buried, but it always remembers where it's been. Beneath those words stood the sculpted figure of Colonel Reuben Miles, not in uniform, not in shackles, but with his hand outstretched, offering, not demanding, a symbol of what America could be when it chose courage over comfort. And that summer, Reuben attended the unveiling in person. His steps were slow, his back still marked by the scars of what had been done to him, but his eyes held a quiet strength. Standing beside him were President Daniel Rhodes, still in office and stronger than ever, and Isabella, no longer just a survivor, but a published whistleblower and civil rights advocate. As the crowd applauded, Reuben simply whispered, "Thank you for listening. Thank you for not forgetting." Across the nation, things hadn't become perfect, but they had become possible. Departments once plagued by corruption were dismantled. Langley was caught 6 months after his escape, hiding in a private compound in South Africa. Eleanor Reeds faced trial and pled guilty, revealing a network of silent sympathizers embedded in positions of power. The rot wasn't gone, but it had been exposed, and that alone had given people hope. And for Daniel Rhodes, re-election wasn't the win, it was the restoration. In his first address of the new term, he didn't speak about policy, he didn't list victories. He spoke about Reuben, about what happens when a country turns its back on its own, and what it takes to face that shame and do better. He ended with this: "We are not measured by the lies told about us, but by the truths we're brave enough to stand up for, even when we stand alone." If you've stayed with us through this journey, thank you. This story wasn't just about one man or one president or one act of injustice. It was about all of us, what we accept, what we ignore, and what we finally choose to stand for. So if this story moved you, if it made you angry or hopeful or just a little more aware, please subscribe. We share real stories that matter, stories that uncover the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Because in times like these, we don't need more silence. We need voices. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And above all, stay brave.